It's the second year of what's going on in Gaza. It's a genocide. Trump is talking about ethnic cleansing. There's no movie that I've been able to watch where I was able to put that in the back burner.
And something I've been thinking about a lot is how skewed lists I've made in the past have been, mostly confined to what fancy international films get picked up at things like Western film festivals, what gets distribution over here.
The films that I thought cut through to me, were including the American films, were especially charismatic performances and charismatic, just in general, characters were central to them. And I feel like that kind of larger than life element is often missing in Hollywood filmmaking, especially in the present day.
Economically, it puts the studios in America at advantage to devalue the movie star and the filmmaking mode that communicates that charisma and allows for those performances to dominate and shape the film. A second thing that's going on is that there is an aversion to filmmaking as magic tricks. Everyone wants movies to be transparent and they want to be smarter than the movie. It's not the silver screen. You don't need to see this guy projected 50 feet up because a character can be owned. You can't own an actor, you can't own an auteur style, but you can own Captain America. So if you're Disney or whatever, why would you ever let anyone be the next Tom Cruise or the next Shah Rukh Khan?
You probably will roll your eyes at this inclusion, but number 10 on my list is Saturday Night. Jason Reitman, long history, 20 years. Thank You for Smoking, I think, like, gains the kind of currency, making a movie that really unraveled and unveiled the nasty face of capitalism. But Jason Reitman, I feel, as a satirist, has had some level of punch. What is the agenda behind making a film besides the fact that it's the 50th year of SNL? I think, like, the thing that really stood out to me about the film was the statement. The film is about the filming of the first episode of SNL, and I'm sure there's a lot of hagiography. On the one hand, actors playing actors who are alive and who are probably better at doing the parts that the younger actors were portraying them. Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that what is the show? What made it what it was, and why did it stick for that long? Besides, Lorne Michaels having pull and everything. And I think the answer to that is, at the time, it was subversive because it was the first time something was unscripted like this, and they didn't know what was going to happen next. So it was essentially an affirmation, in my view, of the idea of collaboration or collectivization of artists and performing together to shedding your ego. There were all of these talents. They were all lumped together, and they didn't get along. There was a lot of tension and friction, and in between all of this, something was born that nobody foresaw. He managed to put that out as a statement. Of course, like, Jason Reitman romanticizes it, makes it sound as if like it was representative of a particular generation and a particular set of sensibilities and so on. Not to mention the entire arc, as well as like all of the gags and all of the scenes, I feel, were done in 30 Rock. But at the same time, I think, like, the biggest takeaway for me is that it really delivered something that is greater than the sum of its parts. The statement is really that, like, the time is ripe for something that can be the greater than the sum of its parts, where the parts are a collective of artists who might or might not get along with each other, but working together based on a shared collective vision.
I did not see this movie, so I can't offer the strongest pushback. I avoided it like the plague, but I was really surprised and delighted to hear that you liked it.
In a sort of way, it really captures the nascentness of the spirit, that these were all like artists who had something that hadn't yet been seen. Like Andy Kaufman, especially, whatever he was doing, the way the film used him is, I think, what ultimately sold me on the film. Willem Dafoe confronts Lorne Michaels as the executive in front of everybody and says, they're about to go on air in like 15 minutes, but they're about to cancel the show. And then says, like, what is this show even about? You got 5 minutes or like 2 minutes to prove to me. I'm pretty sure it probably did not happen the exact same way or something, and it's over dramatized. But I think at that moment they bring in Andy Kaufman and a couple of other acts in like succession. The serialization of one and the other and the one after that, that's what made SNL what it was, at least at that time. That sort of unpredictability. It sort of romanticizes that, but I only take away from it, I think, the collectivization aspect. And I really wish that there was a project that, could involve an ensemble that introduced like 20 people into Hollywood, all of whom were indie and never cared to get a paycheck from a big studio. And maybe we'll have the revolution that Kendrick Lamar was talking about.
My number 10 is Kill by Nikhil Nagesh Bhat. I think this is the only movie on my list that is that I saw in Hindi, which makes it more connected to the most well publicized in America Indian industry. This is number 10 on my list because, like you, I feel I have to defend it a little bit. It's very reminiscent of your Death Wishes, your classic American hyper-violent, hyper-masculine revenge fantasies. The reason why it's here and not any other movie, for me, is because I've been thinking a lot about practicality, filmmaking as craft. I am putting myself in Mumbai, and I am going to try to find the Hindi movie that I can best use to defend the very simple claim that there is highly intelligent, higher craft level operating here than in your average American studio production. And there is a moment in Kill, amidst a lot of arguably very, very stupid dialogue, where a person's head gets removed from his shoulders. And I've been trying to figure out how they made it look so real for 6 months or something. The head like lurches to the side and it's just kind of hanging on by like a strip of fake skin, and it's gross and it's nasty and it looks really fucking real. And I'm constantly scrolling past posts from my American mutuals online talking about how much we love fake blood and squibs and whatever awful, cheap horror movie came out this month. And not a single one of them that I saw last year or heard about last year gave me as visceral a squish as Kill. And the whole thing takes place on a train.
I wanted to watch Kill, but I didn't, and I think it's mainly the reason why that you specified, which was I thought that finally, India was trying to make a movie akin to the kind of stuff that we have seen, the Japanese gore movies, or the even the ones by like the Raid, what immediately came to mind, where like people break bones and like
it's much more the Raid than it is traditional Bollywood action, which is of course much less informed by real martial arts.
Had I watched it, I think like I would have definitely had a more favorable view towards it than, for example, something like Monkey Man, which I think was trying to do the same thing, provide the decontextualized action thriller. And again, even the setting on the train, it kind of establishes that like you don't want to get too caught up in the cultural aspects, because then it becomes a cultural tourism thing as opposed to the violence and the action. But I think it's the gore aspect that made me think, do I really want to watch like 2 hours of people just getting brutalized? But at the same time, I really I enjoy the fact that you enjoyed it, and I can see why it makes your list. Absolutely. Number 9 on my list is also another movie that I feel like I have to start by being on the defensive, which is Rebel Ridge by Jeremy Saulnier. He's the guy who made Green Room. Anton Yelkin is no more with us and stuff, and he's one of the better actors who came out in recent times.
Green Room is fabulous. I'm always telling people Green Room, well, I'm from where Green Room is set, and it's very accurate.
Rebel Ridge is a film about a black man who is stopped by cops. They essentially steal his money. He has $30,000 on him, I think, and he's about to go get his cousin out on bail. And yet, like after that incident, we don't see him rattled. He stealthily goes back to the same police department. Feel like that was kind of the moment that got me. It was like the Equalizer Denzel moment. You think that he's just like a quiet guy who's just gonna take it lying down, but he at that moment they have this big reveal that he's a Marine Corps martial arts instructor, which means that he gets to kind of be this peaceful guy who's never seen combat. He can kill you if he needed, but he just chooses not to, and so on the one hand, it's a fantastic storytelling constraint because he will not, like, he's like Batman because he will not kill. On the other hand, it also kind of sets up this frustrating question of when Sylvester Stallone was able to kill all of those cops in First Blood without any sort of problem. Are you kind of, holding back because this is a black man taking revenge on the police department? And is that the reason why, he's holding back post George Floyd? But at the end of the day, it does seem as if it was a very well executed, and I really liked Aaron Pierre as the main guy. Yeah, every time I find a great American performance, it ends up being a British actor, which is kind of sad and fascinating at the same time. I love Anna Sophia Robb ever since I watched Bridge to Terabithia. So she was fantastic as the pro bono kind of lawyer who's trying to help him, but who's also constrained by the system. So it's basically all of these characters who are extremely constrained by the legal system and yet are trying to fight it and somehow succeed. And I think like the reason the film also worked for me is that I was able to contrast it with something like Dragged Across Concrete. It's kind of similar where it's like you see the black man getting his comeuppance after an entire movie full of ordeals and violence against him. I think like the one positive thing about this film is that like I don't think Aaron Pierre was ever there was no violence that was enacted on him that was gratuitously shown in a sort of way where it's like it becomes like torture porn where black people suffer as a form of entertainment, and his suffering in comparison with Anna Sophia Robb's character, who's like the drug addict single mom who's dealing with like she might lose her job and the police department is actively trying to get her fired by framing her and things like that. So it's kind of like his suffering and her suffering, and they kind of become kindred spirits, and they're united by purpose, and the purpose is taking on the police department of a small town. And I really liked him showing up Dakota Johnson's father in like several scenes.
More importantly, he's the guy from Miami Vice. He's also the cop in multiple movies by S. Craig Zoller, the director of Dragged Across Concrete. My number 9 on mine is Twilight of the Warriors Walled In. I picked another action movie, again for technical reasons. It has some really good performances in it. Sammo Hung is just kind of hanging out in the background as a supporting actor. It's pretty cool. I wanted to put a movie that was a straight up action showcase on the list. And this one is the kind of action movie that I like. It's influenced by real fighting. There's a visceral impact to the fighting, but it's not chained down by realism in the consequences of those fighting. So the villain ends up being a cartoonishly overpowered gimmick character, but the main characters are still doing what is recognizably real martial arts. The setting is really, really impressive to me. The big Kowloon sets that they built are really cool to look at. Yeah, there's something to be said for storytelling, and there's something to be said for character depth, but there's something more to be said for just knowing how to shoot a guy punching another guy in the face. And if you can't do that thing, I don't care if you can do the other thing. Politically, there's not really anything that I feel like saying about it, but I do think that the violence and the suffering manages to escape a more annoying depiction of poverty, and that I really appreciate and respect. I was watching an older Telugu movie starring Chiranjeevi, Ram Charan's dad, called Kaidi, and it's basically it's Rambo. At the end of the movie, he gets a bunch of guns and he single-handedly holds a police station hostage. But I was thinking about when the scene happens where he gets beaten on, how good he looks. There's like a dignity that I don't know. There's movies in America that I like and that are I think are unequivocally good that don't maintain the same kind of dignity for certain characters and protagonists. And in America, obviously, dark skin is a huge factor in that. But that's not present in Kowloon Walled City at all. It takes place in a period setting of China, and I mean, you can't have an American action movie without talking about those politics, really. I mean, you can't, but it comes off really dumb and poorly conceived. I'm sure that I'm going to get a DM from somebody who's like, there's some political stuff you're not paying attention to in this movie, and you should actually care about this. But I didn't walk away wondering about those things. I walked away purely impressed.
And speaking of dignity, I think like I have to say number 8 on my list is probably going to be as much of an eye roll. It's a portrayal that I like to call the anti-substance of this year. The thing about the substance which I hated was that it
Me
became
too.
the thing that it was supposedly critiquing. It basically made it look as if women really had to be young and perky and having the tightest roundest ass, and otherwise like you really don't matter to the world, and then they don't even matter to themselves. For that reason, it Maria by Pablo Larrain was the anti-substance for me, and all because of Angelina Jolie's performance. I don't even think the movie counted for me outside of the performance. I feel like if you take her out, that film is dead. And it was wild because she's not an op. I didn't know she could sing. She's portraying Maria Callas in her last days, where she is more devastated by the loss of her voice and her talent and her ability to sing the way that she once did than anything else. She doesn't even care about the fact that she is physically dying. She is merely devastated by how she cannot do the thing that she once was able to do, and now she wants to do this thing. Whatever version of the performance is the realest thing that she wants to deliver before her death. And a lot of critics even had a problem with the fact that she was portrayed as some sort of junkie, but I think really the performance is that of an artist going through an existential crisis, quite literally at her on her deathbed, and finding solace in the challenge of the performance rather than the kind of adulation that she receives. Having Angelina Jolie do it, A, is just phenomenal casting, but also B, gives it that extra punch of here is an actor who is back to do something that it seems as if only she could do. I was really shocked that somebody would nominate Demi Moore on top of this, because it feels like it's the same performance, but I feel like Angelina Jolie like ran circles around anything that Demi Moore did, and she did it without having to do nudity.
Well, I do think that Lorraine is a more actor forward director. I haven't seen all of his movies. I've seen like three. I did see Spencer. And then the other one that I've seen is El Conde, which is my favorite one. Whether you like them or not, they live and die on their lead performances. And the substance is not that. I really love Demi Moore, but she's not exactly being given the tools to make the movie her own. I think a nomination for Demi Moore is a career achievement award for being Demi Moore, because these institutions are not designed or capable to dispense things based on any kind of merit.
I think I was very moved by an artist not only portraying a great artist who is so good at singing, but also being just bad enough that you're just falling short of great. To represent that with the voice as a musician, also, it kind of like really resonates with me. The moment that you feel like you're losing your voice can almost be like just more devastating than anything else, and for her, and she shows that in every frame of her face. I was extremely furious that she wasn't included, and shocked, and I almost entirely want to attribute it to the fact that she said Gaza is an open air prison and that what's happening is a genocide. I don't think there's
I
any
mean,
other reason why
Angelina
they didn't.
Jolie, you can definitely attribute it to that. She has like one other mark against her in the industry because Brad Pitt is friends with everybody. But like
Mm.
generally, the Gaza thing will kill anybody. Christopherson famously had a hard time getting work.
On that note, what's number 8 on your list?
Mine is a Malayali movie called Aavesham. This is a movie that I only discovered because my stepfather never watches movies. He's not a movie guy. He's married to a movie girl. People in his family are movie people. He doesn't do it. We've been watching these 3 hour Indian movies, me and my mother, for like months and months and months. He's sick of it. So he comes to us and he's like, okay, I found one that I actually want to watch because a rapper that he likes, Hanuman Kind, did a song for the soundtrack. And it's really funny. It made me miss when America made studio comedies because we don't. We just don't anymore. Aavesham, I was laughing every other minute, and it's almost entirely due to one performance, like yours. It's all Fahad Fasil, who appears as a supporting actor in several movies that I saw last year, including another one on this list. But this is the one that he makes the most his own, and he is so funny. It makes me mad about how few character actors we have working in Hollywood. And Fafa, as he's called, it makes you think like, when was the last time America produced like a Wilford Brimley? None of the other movies on my list, well, there's one, but most of them are not that funny. And the only other one that's funny, spoiler alert, is also directed by a Malayalam gentleman who was born in the same region as this one was shot, and came to America to make other movies.
I feel like I know who you're talking about.
You
Uh,
do. We're going to get into them later. But my favorite thing about Indian movies is that there's more than one industry operating in the country. Basically, all American cinema, even the stuff we shoot in Canada, gets wrapped under the Hollywood label, and for good reason. It's hegemonic. And having distinct regional industries with their own language, with their own culture, with their own relationships to national politics, religion, it creates an artistic and creative diversity that just can't exist over here. Expanding beyond just Bollywood and the standard Mumbai fare into specific regions in the South allowed me to fall in love with this medium again in a way that I just have not been able to, trying to sustain off of Hollywood releases because they don't nourish me in the same way. When we get to talking about that guy later, I want to talk about the fact that like he's widely misunderstood and here in the States. And for years I bought into that narrative even after coming around to some of his movies. And now I'm watching movies in his native language made by people from the culture that brought him up. And I'm starting to realize, no, there are roots here. There's patterns. Nothing just forms out of whole cloth the way that we like to imagine inspiration functions in America. And Aavesham is like my pitch movie for how funny Malayalam cinema can be.
One of the things that's often spoken about, especially in our circles of politics and film intersecting, is how
I
Kerala
went to
is the
India
one
for
Indian
a
state
day.
that is
Today
still ruled
we
by the
arrived
Communist
into the
Party.
communist
I love
state of
when
Kerala.
cast members
It
and
was
characters are
incredibly
randomly
strange to
named
see
Lenin and
those
Stalin in
communist
Indian movies.
signs freely
Americans, we
hanging
have
all
this
around,
discourse
coming
now
from a
about
post-Soviet
privileged
era
Westerners
country,
who
Lithuania, where
are
those
too
kind of signs
apologetic
are even
for
forbidden.
your Lenins or your Stalins or your Maos. How do those critiques hold up when you ask yourself, why did these several billion brown people in the world in various countries still look up to these figures and treat them like normal? It's so cool to name your kid after a historical figure like that, or name a fictional character that, without it being a didactic political statement. In an American movie, you wouldn't name a character Lenin unless like he's like secretly evil or something.
The seventh film on my list was the Indian nominee for the to the Oscars, very controversially because it supposedly beat out the more deserving film. Which, and I think like
Um,
I'm gonna make a controversial statement by saying not really, because I actually liked this one as a representative of Indian filmmaking, which is Laapata Ladies or Lost Ladies by Kiran Rao. Kiran Rao is famous for the film Dobby Ghat, but also she used to be married to Amir Khan, who produces this film as well. Two women, two veiled brides, sit in a train compartment next to their respective spouses. They're both going to a small village that they're supposed to get off in the middle of the night. And I have dreaded so many times when I used to travel on the trains in India that you have to actually get off at stops that where the train will only stop for like 2 minutes, and so you have to pack everything and pick up everything and then leave while you have to wake up in time and things like that. And I used to be really paranoid about missing the stop. Two brides get exchanged. One bride goes with the other groom, and then the second bride doesn't really go with anybody. She just stays at the train station, and they basically figure out how to go to their rightful places. It's a comedy of errors, but at the same time, it gives them an opportunity to really understand the psyche of women and their respective grooms in this part of the world. Essentially, this is also propaganda because the cop ends up being a hero in the end. He's first shown to be a very lazy, doesn't do his job well, kind
I'm a
of
bumbling
comedic.
idiot.
But in the end, he ends up being a sort of Shakespearean comedian, where he ends up being the twist to the tale.
The
It's
redeemed oath.
I think it was very moving, simply because I really am touched lately, and especially because Hollywood portrays so little of it, male vulnerability. I love this scene where he's bragging to his the bride that he's going to be arranged married to, and he's sitting next to her and he's like trying to talk to her in English and stuff like that. And then he's like, the second sentence that he says to her is, I love you. They play a soundtrack and all of that. So it's like, obviously, it's overtly sentimental. On the one hand, there's the other groom who's seeking the bride from a sense of entitlement. He's searching for her because he's like dowry and all of those things, but this guy actually likes the girl. I think that character made the women's stories so much more compelling because it humanizes him and also makes them much more human in turn. And like, of course, the central woman character who is escaping a domestically abusive groom, it turns out in the end, who has a questionable dowry death on his hands, which is a very commonplace occurrence. Suddenly a bride would die, and then they'll say it's an accident, and she ends up being somebody who is too smart for that, and that's why she ran away. It's very poignant. It's a simple story, like I said, but at the same time, it's very effective. It's a good representative of not only Bollywood filmmaking but also Marathi filmmaking, which is a little bit of slice of life with comedic and sort of sentimental overload.
Was I watched like three Karthi movies in a row for the past week. My mother has the same reaction to every movie from India, which is the men cry question mark every time. The fact that men can be macho and still openly weep, I'm always struck by, regardless of the political bent of a certain film's approach to subject matter, Indian films consistently have a willingness to talk about real things that happen to real people that we just don't in America. We're not honest about the institution of a marriage in our culture. We're not really honest about how much sexual assault is still bound up in it, how much child abuse is still bound up in it. And it's there. It's different because India and America exist at different ends of an imperial resource extraction process. But the same patriarchal violences are there. The difference is we don't make art that reflects them at all. We make art that is designed to construct an entirely false and sanitized reality.
Let's hear your number 7 film.
Furiosa, while there's a lot that could be written about this film's relationship with the other Mad Max films, there's a lot that goes into, I think, George Miller's imagining of the decay of society over the course of these films. You watch from the first one where there's still cops, there's still stores, there's some semblance of what resembles modern Western civilization. And then by the time you get to the new ones, everything is collapsed into literal dust. were forming entirely new feudal religious structures around water resources, right? But what I find interesting, rather than how it dialogues with those movies, is how this one dialogues with 3,000 Years of Longing. What this movie does with its mythologizing, especially near the end of the Citadel and of its main character and its forays into cartoonishness, are about the things that 3,000 Years of Longing are about, with the malleability of oral storytelling and tradition, and how love and connection exists as a structural component of that. People have problems with the earlier parts of the movie and its physics and use of CGI to create really unrealistic motion. But all I think that does is prepare you for the moment where it fully enters the realm of fantasy storytelling. What the movie is doing with folklore as its own resource, as its own vital source of sustenance, speaks to what I think is valuable about stories and movies as a shared point of experience between you and other human beings. And I also think that like it really puts a fine point on what George Miller has been doing for decades.
I liked Fury Road. The performances of Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy, and the gang of the concubines who kind of go on this revenge plot against Immortan Joe. Furiosa is a prequel to Fury Road. So I feel like even Furiosa got even more inventive with the visual storytelling. So much more of the tracking shots were like even crazier than even Fury Road. But at the same time, I don't know, Chris Hemsworth, man. Fuck that guy.
Yeah,
I
I do.
can't get
Okay,
behind
I
that
I
dude.
think that I think that Anya Taylor-Joy did a really good job of
She was all right, yeah.
she does a good job of feeding into Charlize's performance, right? Like by the time she shaves her head and there's that shot behind her, there's a line that
Hmm.
she says where you're like, oh, that sounds like Charlize's voice. I do think Hemsworth's performance has been overrated. I think it's fine, but also I think he's pretty replaceable.
It's so much that he's Thor, and he's not unable to shake the Thor out of him.
He's
I've yet to
definitely
see him.
giving Thor when he says, let's make it epic.
It's such a fantastic scene. I feel I could only think of like Tom Hardy would have killed this scene.
I think that it's smart actually to have that character do a shitty Reddit Borderlands line dialogue. But I agree that there are people who could have done it to a higher elevation than Hemsworth is able to.
So number six on my list is Bird. Andrea Arnold is a British filmmaker who follows in the tradition of working class kitchen sink filmmaking that like you can think of Mike Lee, Ken Loach, like a couple of films in my list are kind of like almost like observe a trend where these are neo-realist or neo-realist films which are so slice of life, and it actually has Barry
It's Keegan.
Keegan. He's a good actor, and I think he's a cool guy. And it seems like he does a lot of shoestring indies, and this is a shoestring indie. Bird is about a black girl, but her mom essentially is with a new guy, and she doesn't really get along with him. There's a surreal character who's introduced, who's just called Bird. He might or might not be an actual bird or a bird man. The black girl character is also, as she's coming to terms with her own, she hits puberty, she's coming to terms with her own sexuality, etc. The bird character is seen in a couple of scenes. Often, I think, like not just a couple of scenes that he's presenting as a male character, but and he goes by he, but he wears skirts. The plot is that like her mom's boyfriend is pretty abusive, and she wants to run away from the situation rather than deal with it, and then this bird character steps in and kind of helps her deal with it. He's a supernatural character in a neorealist film. And that's what actually fascinates me. It's a new trend that I'm starting to see where neorealist or like realistic films are starting to have this third act that kind of goes towards surrealism to give that final punch of like saying this is not happening within the logic of the film. Like the final act serves as a sort of magic trick that solves or addresses the main character's conflict while also kind of reaching for something that's a little more of an elevated take. Here, I can only interpret that as a sort of some sort of coming to terms with the queerness, because the black girl at the center might or might not start exhibiting bird-like tendencies in the end.
I haven't seen this, but I would be fascinated to look out for more specific markers of that queerness. Now that I've heard your take on it, I do think that that's always fascinating. I'm always here for watching any movie that kind of dabbles in gender bending or explorations of unconventional sexuality. My next movie is also that, but much more explicit because it's stress positions. I put together an entire separate top 10 list of just trans movies. Obviously, the really, really well publicized ones are People's Joker and I Saw the TV Glow. The People's Joker specifically almost made this list. But instead, I went with Theda Hammels. My best trans woman friend is from Argentina. And I cannot stop thinking about her review of TV Glow and her feelings about The People's Joker as a project, which are not particularly harsh or critical, I don't think, but she feels a little bit alienated by them because of how specifically American the trans experiences on display are. Jane Schoenbrunn and Vera Drew, who's amazing. Shout out to my mutual. Two like incredibly unique and colorful visions for what transness on screen looks like, and I love them. But Theda Hammels speaks to a representation issue in these conversations. I love Vera Drew. I want her to keep making movies forever. I also want other kinds of trans women to make movies alongside her. And I think that Theda's movie reaches past a certain Western identity. And that's not to say that The People's Joker is necessarily held back by being a Western film, but it's a movie about comic book characters and Lorne Michaels. I Saw the TV Glow is more or less about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Those are very important things to me as a white woman who grew up post 90s in America, but they're not important in the exact same way to every single trans woman. Stress Positions, like those other two movies, has been lauded in the narrow spaces where it's getting talked about for reaching past just being a movie about being a trans woman and trying to be about more than that. I Saw the TV Glow. There's all this discourse about what it has to say about nostalgia. First and foremost, it's a movie about being trans, but that is there. People's Joker is about being trans, but the stuff about copyright is still foisted upon Vera. She still has to answer these questions about fucking Batman. Stress Positions is here on the list because I think, aside from being a beautiful, perfect movie about feelings that I have, which The People's Joker is, all the stuff with the mom speaks to me very deeply. All the stuff about burying yourself in certain fandoms, I'm right there with her. Theda Hammels' movie speaks to a different set of experiences I have from later in my life when I was a little bit older and the pandemic hit. I am reminded of my father who did the banging on pots and pans at 7 o'clock thing. I don't know if you know, but a bunch of American well-to-do yuppies started doing that during the pandemic as some sort of symbolic gesture for healthcare workers.
You used to hear so much, Pablo, so much about terrorism, the threat of international terrorism at our schools and airports. You will not believe what he said about me back in college, Pablo. Who he said I looked like.
Who, Terry?
Go on, tell him.
No.
You're not going to tell him?
Who?
Terry said that with my shirt off, I look just like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed.
You did.
What kind of a thing is that to tell a woman?
I didn't know you were a woman.
How could a woman look so much like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed with my hairy back and neck, right, Terry?
Wait,
main
Who's Khalid
character
Sheikh Mohammed?
and the storytelling around immigration.
He
Forget all of the trans stuff. It's a
orchestrated
really good movie
9/11.
about our current moment of forced migrancy.
Number five now, which is actually, since you mentioned the pandemic, I think this is the only film and the best one that I've seen about the pandemic, and it's fun. It's like you shouted out Vera Drew as a Twitter mutual. I feel like Chris Bell is probably both of our Twitter mutuals, but Failed State is the fifth film on my list, and it follows this character called Dale, and which is also the name of the actor. And he's this really eccentric looking, Jesus looking motherfucker. And he's a guy who does deliveries during the pandemic, and he does deliveries across all five boroughs. And what's fascinating is that it's absurdist from the get go. The deliveries that he does decreasingly make sense. Like at first, it starts with like he's delivering just food and essentials and stuff like that, and over time, he starts delivering stuff like a whole bag of softballs to somebody who's at a baseball field and wants to hit, and he even gets the chance to hit a couple of balls with him. He delivers a potted plant. He delivers flowers to a grave site, and stuff like that. And it's basically the filmmakers, by following this one character who's extremely delighted to do his job of doing these deliveries, doesn't even realize that he's a below poverty line worker. And when he's confronted by that, he says like, "Nah, that can't be true." And there are moments where he's like bitingly honest about his life. And apparently, I heard from the director that the character is actually half like telling the truth most of the time. And here's a character who openly says that he would piss on his father's grave, and that he misses his mom. And in the middle of the film, he writes a letter to his mom, and he cries tears, saying the simplest things like "I wish you were here." That's it. And he mails it to her and posts it in the mailbox. And the filmmakers follow him like he's a documentary subject, and it doesn't go very well. Like as increasingly the deliveries get more and more absurd, his life derails. Like he's behind on rent. It's a very simple tragic tale of somebody uh, basically having a breakdown, losing his mind in the pandemic, the bottom rung of society without a way of coming out at all. And there's a character like him that you would have probably come across who wouldn't shut up, who would just tell you whatever. He might be very reactionary. He might enter into conspiracy theorist territory often, and things like that. But he will never shut up. He's extremely conscientious. He's extremely empathetic. Just a very beautiful character study of an extremely eccentric, unconventional character, which if Hollywood had touched on him, they would have caricatured him to no extent. And I have never seen this level of a real portrayal of a. And he's effectively a non-actor. He goes for auditions for extras and small roles and things like that. But besides that, he's not a Hollywood actor or a TV actor even. So it's a compelling lead performance by somebody who you would not see in a lead role.
I really like that setup. You ever hear that line about how the detective is the perfect film protagonist because structurally, as a job, it gives you an excuse to traverse the city? I'm always thinking about how even more true that is for gig workers who do deliveries. The Grubhub driver, the DoorDash guy, presents like this perfect archetype for writing a town or any geography into your story. You have an excuse for him to go anywhere in the city, anytime. And it's super underutilized. Millions of people are doing that job and having little stories every single day, and nobody's making movies about it. I mean, presumably for the same reason American filmmakers are scared to tackle things like cell phones and social media on screen. But it feels like a missed opportunity, does it?
Definitely, definitely. All right, what's number five on your list?
It's Trap. Everyone should have Trap on their list. It's ridiculous. It's not on everyone's list. I don't get people who don't think it's great. Doesn't make sense to me. It's an M. Night Shyamalan movie. I keep bringing him up every time I have a conversation with anybody. And part of the reason why is what I was saying earlier. He's from Kerala, Malayali gentleman. At this point, it's almost hack. to say that people don't take his movies seriously because he's a brown man, but it's just so true. And this one, I think, really sticks in my craw because I finally know what filmmakers in Kerala are actually doing now. I've seen Mohanlal movies. I didn't know who the complete actor was before. And now that I can place it in some kind of context besides just here's this transplant who showed up in Hollywood, pulled the sixth sense out of his ass. People are dismissive of him because of not just the color of his skin, the style and tone of his storytelling. Trap is an amazing movie to me, not just because of what's on screen, but because of what's not on screen. I keep hearing these complaints about the third act, about leaving the stadium, leaving the premise behind, about there not being enough Allison Pill, about the themes around fatherhood and letting down your daughters, things of that nature not coalescing. And I think it's all crap. All that is wrong. Everything that those people want to be in the movie is there. They're not seeing it because they're watching the movie wrong. What Allison Pill does in the third act of this movie, combined with Salika, paints for you a picture of a 30-year relationship with this Dexter Morgan motherfucker, played by an incredible Josh Hartnett, who's killing it, obviously. I don't want the movie to stop and spell out how manipulative and abusive he is. I've just seen a full hour of him being this OCD, heavy scare quotes on OCD, because it's not really how OCD works. But that's how they refer to him. And he's written like, yeah, a Dexter or a monk.
Mm-hmm.
And when Allison Pill shows up, I don't need anything else. I don't need her to break down what the relationship is like. I already can see on her face, after having seen how this guy interacts with his daughter and every single person at the stadium, what this level of control is. I recognize the patriarchal violence, the kind of like micromanaging, the like need for sanitization. All of it's right there on Allison Pill's face during that scene where he takes his shirt off. And Salika, who everyone's like, well, she can't act or whatever, is doing one of my favorite supporting performances of the year because she's performing in a way that's not traditional acting. She's performing with a set of skills that's built to the stage, that's built towards singing, and it works completely because she has screen presence. She has charisma. It doesn't matter if I believe that she's in that bathroom on social media, crowdsourcing a solution to a serial killer problem, because I am in love with watching her do it. Shyamalan understands that. Shyamalan understands when to keep committing to your premise, and he understands when it's time to step back and say, you know what? You've seen everything that I've teased you in my advertisements, in my trailer. It's time to show you something you weren't expecting.
The reason I don't have Trap on my list is I was almost sure that you were gonna have Trap, and second of all, I didn't watch Trap yet because it's not on a streaming platform that I have. I'm 100% positive that it would have made my list, and I'm really glad that I didn't include it because if you remember, I almost I started this we were gonna do this thing by saying that what if we made 20 films that it became a list of 20 films as opposed to us having any overlap. And I think like it's fast becoming the case that we might actually 20 different films because you didn't include The People's Joker, you said, and I definitely have it on my list. The fourth film on my list is the usual suspect from India this year, which is All We Imagine as Light.
Yes,
And
excellent choice.
I was like kind of at almost a place where I didn't want to include it over Laapata Ladies because I kind of wanted to make the statement that like, it's okay for you to, as an Indian, make a film that's not, aspiring to Western standards, but is actually rooted in this Bollywood context. But I think the thing that sold the film for me is that it's the best, I feel, use of this neorealist depiction with a surrealist third act twist. And Bird does that. Fail State does that too. And All We Imagine as Light does that as well, and it's fascinating because the neorealism depicts two characters who are nurses in Mumbai, who are Malayali nurses, and they're not usual characters who are represented in film. They're extremely empowered women who are able to live independently and just rely and depend on each other. One is younger, a little more irrational, seemingly. The older one is married, and she has this long distance marriage where she barely talks to her husband. We don't even know what the husband is, whether he's alive or dead, and she's yearning for closure from him because she wants to move on with her life, and he's in Germany. And I read the film as basically the two characters where one character's third act is a sex scene, and the other character's third act is that she takes care of this wounded person who might or might not be a real character. Essentially, both of those involve a sort of internal and external actualization. It feels like it almost feels as if like the two women are almost the same person, and one is a portrayal of her inner desires, and the other is a portrayal of her outer desires. And interestingly, there's a Michael Winterbottom film, I think, called Butterfly Kiss, which and Thelma and Louise is another example of like two women who could arguably be read as a yin and yang of the same person, Fight Club like, and
I
so
love
on. And
reading films like that. I'm always saying the only way to understand the matrices is by looking at Neo and Trinity as two parts of one character.
beautiful. Yeah, I think like All We Imagine is Light definitely it's less seen as a sort of homoerotic tension and stuff, and I think it's more like they're almost the same person. One is extremely quiet, one is vocal. But I was definitely sold on the film quite, ironically, on the scene where the younger, sort of more foolish, if you will, nurse character who's like chasing this Muslim boy goes to this store and buys a burqa, and she wears this burqa because she can't be seen in his neighborhood where they want to fuck. Basically, his parents are out of town, and she's like
So
gone through
real.
this whole ordeal of like wearing the burqa, and she's on the train, and then he gives her a call, and he's actually texts her, and he blows her off. And she looks like such a fool in that scene. She like takes her burqa off, and she's like looking at the phone, and her face falls. And I'm like, that scene really moved me because I was like, the amount of effort that she puts in to get laid. And I'm like,
Really
man, if
awesome. There's
there's
like a
one
Muslim
thing,
episode of Sex in the City.
right? And I was almost, and she's not Muslim, and he's
No,
Muslim, and the fact that she's jumping through the hoops to fuck him, and she
it was good.
finally, gets to, and all of those things. It's beautiful. I felt like that scene more than even the surreal twist got me really liking this film, even though it has a lot of the Western treatment of like making sure that the camera always
So
captures an aesthetically pretty scene, even if
it's
it's
such a
portraying.
it's such a hard position for that filmmaker to be in, right? Because the whole reason we're having this conversation is because we're dealing with a white supremacist institution that only allows one submission per country.
Hmm.
The whole Laapata ladies versus All We Imagine is Light is so crazy on some level because there's some truth to these arguments. Laapata ladies is a more quintessentially Indian tasting movie. But All We Imagine is Light is a beautiful film in its own right. And in a lot of ways, it's a shame that the filmmaker has to contend with this image as a westernized production because Westerners have such an impossibly narrow understanding and view of Indian film overall.
I think that's one of the reasons why I included both of them on my list, and I really think that like
Good
both of them
inclusion.
deserve to be best film nominees because they are better films than the 10 films that we have
Sure
finally.
better than Wicked. I tell you what.
And let's hear your number 4 film.
Pushpa, 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 Raj! Best movie. It's not, but I wanted to put it number one. I had to argue myself out of it. I am obsessed with the mass action hero as an archetype in cinema. I can't get enough of it. It is everything that I wish movies were like over here. And this one is the cream of the Telugu crop from this past year. It's been getting the most attention of the major industries from distributors specifically. The only movies from India that play at the theater where I live are Telugu movies. I think we got one Tamil movie last year, and it was only because it was Goat. It was the stupid giant telepathy one. The rest of them were all Telugu movies because the lesson the distributors learned from RRR was go to Hyderabad.
There's a lot of Telugu people, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there are, and they make some pretty exciting movies sometimes. This one is a follow-up to a part one, which is a gimmick that I notoriously can't stand over here. Hate when American studios split movies into two-parters. And I keep thinking about Wicked specifically, because I got dragged to Wicked by a family member. And I hated every second of it. I think I have it at like 2 stars. I hate that movie. It's ugly. None of it visually looks good. It feels 6 hours long. The music is good. The actors are doing their best. But you can't get over the fact that the movie is produced by a company and a director that hates movies. Pushpa might be a pretty commercial film, and a lot of Indian film critics that I follow are pretty harsh on its gender politics and on its plotting. And I think that it's the perfect example of people in India taking things for granted because they're used to them just being a given, while I find them almost impossible to find in movies nowadays. Pushpa has a level of excitement, a level of physical volume, and of color on screen that I'm dying for in the American movie theater. And nerds will argue with me on the technical definition of this word, but by American marketing standards, this is a musical. America, if you have full musical numbers, doesn't matter about the diegetics. It doesn't matter how they structurally fit in. We market it as a musical because you cannot get people to show up for a movie with full music videos in it. So people will, release a movie and pretend like it's not a musical. That's how backwards we have it here. Pushpa 2, not fundamentally built like a Western musical, more than delivering as much fun as a classic old Hollywood musical. The main performance is pure star power. I have not met a single person who is not sexually attracted to Allu Arjun. Iconic. And Rashmika, hello, gets to do a thing that I have been obsessed with Telugu actresses getting to do these past couple of years, which is be horny. Kapoor woman who's in Devara, the NTR Jr. movie from last year, she has this whole song about how she, quote unquote, erupts for him when he arrives, and it's hilarious. And I see these critiques that are like about the fact that the protagonist is rescuing women from sexual assailants and built around the kind of machismo of it. And they're correct. It's a machismo movie. But I want you to imagine that movie being made in America. And the thing that's not there is the cross-dressing. The entire climactic action sequence of this movie is Allu Arjun dressed as a mother goddess. The villains redress him when a scene transition happens and he's no longer dressed this way. He's dressed as a man. They dress him back up. They go to the trouble of applying turmeric on his face and everything. And instead of ripping it off and asserting his masculinity, he bites one of them in the neck without even untying his hands. And it's the most spectacular thing I've seen in a movie theater. My ear was ringing for 3 hours afterwards. And I was thankful for every second of it. And I cannot believe that I'm saying that about a movie that has part 2 in the title. A thing that I cannot stand over here.
Talk about something that you cannot stand, right? Because that's I feel a cool segue into number 3 on my list, which is basically The People's Joker.
Superheroes? Who would have thought?
Yeah, superheroes. I thought The People's Joker was a musical too. First of all, I have to start by saying The People's Joker is a film that cannot be defined as anything. I think it like really I like saying that People's Joker is the Clerks of our time. It's like to
This is
even
such a
say
good,
that this
this is
is
such a good line.
this is such a film that I didn't even know was possible before I saw it. I didn't know that you could make a film with just, I didn't even, what is it, green screen? Is it CGI? Very cheap graphics and barely shot
Everything
on
under the
location.
sun.
Basically nothing. There's almost no production value. It's just pure editing and scene setting to an extent, and like barely any staging, some amount of graphics, a little bit of costume design.
It's the most impressive thing that I think has ever come out of what I would call the YouTuber tradition of mixed.
Right. It feels as if it was a meme movie, but it's actually not. It's one of the most serious films that has ever been made
Like,
in
it's
like
just
Hollywood.
drawing on those kinds of artistic techniques. Like, you can tell
Right.
this is someone who's spent a lot of time online, who's spent time with short form digital video.
And that's why, like, I'm not able to say this is a linear plot. Like, is it actually about the people's like? First of all, is it a story about Harley Quinn? Is it a story about the Joker? Is it a story about Batman? It's none of those things. It's actually a story about Vera Drew and her transition. And I feel like it was fantastic because it actually depicted the transition and in a very evocative and funny way. And it
Yeah.
really handholds you through the whole process. It feels as if like I'm gonna say this would be the film on my list. There are two trans films on my list, I think, unless I included a third, I forget. But definitely two trans films. The one that's higher on my list is one that moved me more. But I really think that this is also this is a trans film that I feel was fine for trans people also. Like I feel like trans films get made because they want to handhold cis audiences to understand what it's like and things like that. So a lot of these things, it's kind of like when an Indian director makes a film for Western audiences where you have to over explain and things like that. But I think People's Joker really like kind of found a way to balance the fact that it doesn't want to perform for a non-trans audience, but at the same time maintain the narrative in such a way that it's neat enough that a trans person doesn't feel like it's bulky or excessive.
It walks a very fine line, right? Because there are those parts, especially in the kind of cloudy dream realm it cuts to sometimes, where she is pretty explicitly explaining to camera how trans stuff works in a rudimentary way. But you're right, it completely overcomes the tendency to become a PSA for cis people.
As a cis person, I hate when somebody treats me like I'm a moron. I want people to talk to me like I get it, you know.
Sure.
I don't want a trans person try to tell me like, you know, you don't get what's actually going on. No, I have frames of reference that I could possibly use to, the way you said the trans film that you were talking about earlier, Stress Positions, is actually an immigration film. I can think of an immigration angle that could actually even have a frame of reference to empathize with transness because there is an element of transition that happens in the character where you see an emergence of a personality that might not have existed before. And I'm not trying to say that like that is equivalent to a trans experience, but I feel like these are ways by which we can relate to trans identity as cis people without having to, you know, have the whole argument of like, oh, now you got both genders or like now you got
Ugh.
nothing and things like those.
No,
It's
yeah,
like, yeah, we get it. We understand what transformation is. Like trans implies trans,
absolutely.
not just transition, but also transformation. And I think like the thing that makes the People's Joker really compelling is that like it's unflinching in the critique and the satire aspect of it. Of course, Lorne Michaels, and I find it fascinating, especially to pair it with Saturday Night, because it shows a young Lorne Michaels as like being a visionary and things like that, and it's almost like a sort of before and after picture where Lorne Michaels in this is a villain, an antagonist who is effectively the gatekeeper for a talent like this from emerging, and she is like hitting him pretty hard. I don't think she's gunning for a place on SNL at all.
Do you
In
know
once,
about what happened with what's her name? Sarah Squirm?
I know
She
she
was
was on
going,
SNL.
well, yes, she was. But right before she got hired, in order to get hired, she dropped out of playing Lorne in The People's Joker.
Wow.
Obviously, like she's not going to be able to talk super openly about that because of who Lauren is. But isn't that a fascinating thread and angle in there? How
Right.
close the world of Vera Drew is to the thing that she is at the same time kept so distant from. I find that fascinating.
Let's hear your number three film.
Nickel Boys, Rommel Ross. I really, really like this movie. I keep comparing it to The Message. You ever seen that from the 70s?
No.
The Message is a movie that uses first person photography to get around depicting the prophet, peace be upon him.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of consultation with various cleric groups and experts that went into trying to make a movie about this figure that cannot be depicted in a way that is spiritually respectful. And I keep thinking back to it because it's my go-to example for first-person photography that does not feel like a useless gimmick. But what connects that to this for me is that the kind of respect and dignity, as we brought up earlier in this conversation, that affords during the message, I think is really important here with what RaMell Ross is doing. I've heard some criticisms of the third act and the ending, but for me, I think as a rejoinder to, or just a response to the last 10, 15 years of prestige filmmaking about Black suffering, I find it refreshing. I've been wading through these conversations about things like 12 Years a Slave, that movie about Harriet Tubman from a couple years ago, even stuff as ridiculous as Django. For as long as I can remember, I've been hearing people around me have these conversations about like both the ethics of what you depict and how you depict it, but also like where's the value? This movie brings an answer to that. I feel almost like it should have been made 30, 40 years prior in terms of what it does to move the ball forward on the artistic representation of that history. It feels decades overdue.
I haven't watched Nickel Boys, but I heard of the conceit, and I'm really again like no reason other than the fact that it wasn't on any streaming platform that I was immediately able to access. But I knew that I saw your review of it, and I really admired and appreciated it. I've also seen critical reviews. I think Mel's was the one that I saw, which really didn't buy the conceit. But I think like one movie that I'm being reminded of is Ma Mannan, which is a Tamil movie that came out in 2023 in which
I
they
love that one.
and I compared it with Killers of the Flower Moon in my head at that time because they portray the violence against Dalit
Yeah, the
kids that they
anti-caste hate crime at the beginning in the well.
yeah. And the well, they hit them with rocks and things, and the way that it's portrayed is as much as they show the actual violence. I like the way that they showed Fahad Fasil doing like he basically kills one of his dogs by beating it to death. And the way that they depict the violence of Fahad Fasil killing the dog even is that it's just his face like being extremely brutal and hitting it to death, and he actually does such a
He's so good
fantastic
in
over
that
the
scene. Yeah,
wow. I
you can
was like,
see
and
a dog dying in his eyes. It's
in
crazy.
his eyes, yeah, and the yelps. It's not even like it's just the bone crunching that you hear, and he's hitting the dog right even after it's dead and stuff. So yeah, I can see the merit in like a first person camera kind of capturing violence against black people without becoming Fruitvale Station or 12 years a slave, where the brutality becomes the point or the entertainment value.
The main character's mother is a really good supporting actress performance as well. And there's a lot of texture there that's not just anguish. It's not just bearing witness to suffering, which is a
Right.
thing we keep having to talk about in our current political moment because it's so useless.
The second film on my list is a film that I want you to watch in case you haven't already watched is
Mm.
Crossing, and it's a film by a first time I'm seeing a film by him, and I watched it because I was so fascinated that it's thematically as well as in style and everything, and his name even is very similar to a favorite filmmaker of mine, Fatih Akin, who's Turkish German, and he made this film called The Edge of Heaven, and he also made a film called Crossing the Bridge: The Sound of Istanbul, which was about Turkish. It's a Turkish music documentary that covers everything from punk to traditional Turkish music. And this is a film by somebody called Levan Akin. He's Swedish Turkish migrant, and he makes this film called Crossing, whose lead is a Georgian old lady, and she meets this Georgian kid who's going to escort her to Istanbul, where she can try to find her niece, who's trans. And she has no idea. She doesn't even have a picture. She just knows her name, and she asks around. The guy takes her to the red light district, where everybody is trans, and like they have their pimps and who are also trans women, interestingly. So it's, I don't know if it's a sociological portrayal where in Turkey it's kind of like almost like a brothel that's being run by, it's like a rooming situation where it's run by a trans woman, and there's like all of these trans escorts, and so on.
We
And
have been known to do that.
and essentially what I think is fascinating about this film, this is the trans film for cis people. I think this is what Emilia Perez fails to be, because it doesn't coddle you, it doesn't treat you like you're a moron. This woman is already, and like she's struggling with a little bit of like, actually she's not at all. The old lady is the most conscientious. She's searching for her niece because she loves her. She doesn't even want to stop looking for her. That's how much she loves her. There is no question of like, she's searching for her because she's regretting the fact that she even had to leave in the first place. That's why she's searching for her. The kid, he's a dumbass. Like, he's just a guy who wants to make a buck. But even he is so open-minded, and to the point where it doesn't even register for him that this is like supposedly a different type of person or something like that. It's a woman. And there's a third character whom there's like a sort of almost like a mystery as to whether she is the niece or not, and in a kind of way, I don't know if I'm spoiling the suspense because she's not. And there's a trans character who is like a fantastic portrayal where she's like a 33-year-old woman, and she meets this taxi driver who's like 25, and he's like, I related to him so much because I like older women, and like he just basically hits on her like he hits on an older woman, like basically
For
like
real.
yeah, and she like says I'm trans, and he's like, did I ask you? And and then and it's just so funny because like he's just riffing on her, and they fuck in the taxi, and it's not portrayed in like some sort of titillating sort of way or anything. It's just like an intimate scene that they have, and he's just such a comically normal boring character where he's like treating her like he's crushing on her like he's a puppy. And I was just so fascinated that like, okay, yeah, why not, and like why should the portrayal always otherize her in this sort of way? And the last aspect is that it's such a poignant tale of migration and how so many factors interplay, especially in a place like Istanbul, where there are all kinds of cultures, all kinds of people, and in the end, nobody gets what they're looking for, and also gets everything that they're looking for at the same time. They don't get what they go out searching to do, but they end up growing to a point where their search either doesn't, they understand and they reconcile with the fact that their search is not going to end, or they accept the reality of their circumstances in a sort of spiritual way that's not just stoic but also kind of mystical. And that's what I think, like there's something about Islamic Turkish, especially Sufi tradition, that I love, where even Rumi's book is called It Is What It Is, but it's not an it is what it is like we can't do anything about it. It's like, yeah, we are going to do something about it, but it is also what it is. And I was just fascinated with how they portrayed the old lady as the one who is the most enlightened one. Like, it's not even like the kids are teaching her how this is trans and this is not and stuff like that. She actually knows. You don't have to explain to her what a woman is. She gets it.
Beautiful. My number two is Red Rooms. This is a Quebecois movie. Red Rooms is a movie that I have been waiting for ever since my family members started getting into true crime a few years ago. It is a assault on your senses in a number of ways, and it is incredibly refreshing when it slaps you across your face. The dynamic between the two main actresses is something that I have been thinking about moment to moment for weeks now. I am kind of obsessed with Juliette Grippi, I think is how you pronounce that woman's name. What Pascal Plant is able to do with her and with basic suspense and tension keeps you in a physical state of reaction for like the entire runtime in a way that like message movies just don't. Like we make a lot of these really kind of straight down the line, lecturing the audience, hyper didactic, no room for interpretation pieces down here in America. We shoot them up in Canada all the time. This one manages to deliver a very incisive and cutting thesis, but it does it in such a way that is almost secondary to taking you along for this ride with this woman. And the culmination of that ride is not just one of the most innovative stories about our engagement with criminal psychology and criminal pop culture content and the legal system as spectacle, but also I think like a really powerful piece on how technology is used on screen. I'm always talking about how Indian filmmakers have no problem putting a cell phone on the screen. American filmmakers don't know what to do with the fact that we all have cell phones now. So the good auteurs just avoid them entirely, never put them on screen. And the lesser ones write and shoot these embarrassing to look at, poorly blocked, really bad sequences because they haven't stopped to think about how the cell phone as a piece of technology changes the storytelling space, the geographic shape of that space. And what this does is tackles the question of how the internet physically shapes the structure of these stories in a way that like feels confident and not just has something to say, but knows how to say it in a way that is really transcendent of language, I think.
The cell phone aspect reminds me that one of the aspects that I did not discuss of All We Imagine Is Late is how beautifully it portrays text messages. Most of the conversations that happen in the film, it's almost a silent film because the characters are so introverted. A lot of conversations.
Filmmakers use texting as a visual component.
Yeah, and it's beautiful that like it's almost used like silent movie cue cards with the backdrop of the scene against it, and you see the characters kind of reacting and talking and having facial expressions and things like that, and the text just flashes on the screen with a little bit of spare the theme music, and it was beautiful. Like I think
versions of that over here all the time, they never land the same way.
So yeah, that brings me to the last. Which
Tell me about your number one.
Number one is going to be a curveball. My number one is October 7 by Al Jazeera. The documentary on what actually happened on October 7 with Al Jazeera Investigates, which is on YouTube, which everybody I think should watch if they haven't already watched. The documentary that is being touted as the documentary to watch about Israel-Palestine is No Other Land is what is being touted, and it's also an Academy Award nominee, and a lot of furor has been unleashed on based on how it's not even getting distribution here and so on. But somehow, like that film, I've even seen critiques of it that it's kind of like offering a little bit of the liberal Zionist perspective and so on. But that's why I want to get to October 7, the documentary by Al Jazeera, which literally tries to explain to the people. It was released a year after the October 7 event, and it contextualizes what happened as it is an act of war but it is extremely overblown and falsely represented. And being used as a reason to justify the genocide. And I think like it's really important for people to understand that they used by all means necessary when you're resisting an imperialist occupying force that knows no mercy is necessitated because of the right to return, the March of Return being like an historically tragic mass murder incident where they shot at people at random, and there's so many testimonials on what happened both on October 7 as well as everything that happened before. And Al Jazeera, I feel like, has been extremely thorough in covering it, where they wanted to make sure that not only are they saying that what happened on October 7, so the record is clear, is that the Palestinian fighters committed an act of war because it was a last gasp effort for them to change the conversation about what's happening in Gaza, and they achieved it to the extent that they could, because since then there has been a huge seismic shift in the way that we're talking about the issue.
I'm sorry to be graphic here, but I can't see a baby here. If you can activate people's sense of disgust, they're more likely to support dire retribution against Palestinians.
It reveals some of the victims were killed by Israeli forces.
This footage I find very disturbing. We don't know who those individuals are. Gunmen, civilians, or hostages.
And it finds that October 7 may have changed the politics of the region forever.
Ugly face even more by killing its own people. And I think like a lot of especially American audiences really need to watch this, because everybody's under the impression that like even now when somebody has to say something positive about Palestine, they have to start by disavowing October 7. And I think like I side with Norm Finkelstein here, where you have to understand it as the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising or as Nat Turner and nothing else. Like if you are seeing it as anything else, then you are mistaken and propagandized. And that's the framework from which the documentary, that's not the framework from which it approaches the topic, but it arrives at that conclusion. And that's what I liked about it. It doesn't start there. It gets there. It establishes that very systematically over the course of the film.
Mine, Maya Zagan, starring Karthi.
It is called May Aragon.
May Aragon?
Yeah. May Aragon means...
I've only seen... I don't know how to pronounce it, obviously.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Language. Definitely. Tell me about it.
The Tamil Z will never not fuck me up. Sorry. Anyway, this is my favorite movie of the year. This is my favorite movie for the whole of India that I saw. I saw like 60 movies from India that came out last year or something like that.
That's 58 more movies than I've seen.
And this is the cream of the crop, because it actually subverts a lot of the things that I like about Tamil cinema. It's quiet. It doesn't have a single fight sequence, I don't think. There's no real action in it. It is two actors getting to really dig into face-to-face performing. It's hard to put my finger on what it reminds me of, but there is something oddly nostalgic about Karthi's weeping to me when that final moment in the film comes together. This is a story about two guys who meet at a wedding. One of them remembers the other guy very, very fondly. The other one doesn't recognize this guy. So he spends the whole night wandering around a party with a guy he has no knowledge of, but who insists was clearly a close personal friend of his a lifetime ago. I don't really have a way to connect it to my politics per se, but I wanted to talk about it because to me, every time I have the conversation about Laapata ladies versus All We Imagine Is Light, and the question comes down to, okay, what would you send if you have the whole of India to take movies from, and you get one shot at impressing these dickheads in California? This is the movie that I'm choosing, because it is, to me, the most kind of inarguable display of why you have to take this region seriously. It is in touch with human beings in a way that American studio filmmaking has not been able to achieve since before I was born. For as much as I can talk about the Rajnikanth movie that came out last year, which was super fun, or Ryan, which was a Danush movie that I was obsessed with, I don't know that they can make as compelling a case for how much I think people need to be putting their eyes on Tamil Nadu and Chennai. This is a movie that, like, with none of the tricks that the other 9 movies I have used, it doesn't have a trans connection for me. It doesn't have any pandering or appeal to my political principles. It does not check these somewhat more superficial boxes that Kill or Pushpa or a Walled City movie check for me. It doesn't have any of those things. But the humanity that is on display and how it is able to capture incredibly complex emotions of human experience made me tear up. I didn't see a single movie last year that did more with less.